Is New York City using up its second chances? I lived in West Harlem in the bad old days when each street had its gang and deaths. New York City almost collapsed. There are signs that we're slipping backwards again. Pieces of a subway station in Queens fell on 2 cars. When I walk along the overhead line in Jackson Heights, you can see the severe corrosion. Thick pieces of the ironworks are flaking off. The subway system seems to be in an uproar. The housing projects are run down, and management has been taken over by the federal government. Crime in the schools is skyrocketing at alarming rates. Hate crimes don't seem to cease. Politics seems to create hate, not love. The city just seems to be in a turmoil and gradually slipping backwards. We need not a second chance, we need a third chance to get this city together. We have here today a man who is familiar with second chances, third chances, fourth chances, fifth chances. Reverend Hector Vega, thank you for joining the show.
Thank you for having me.
You grew up on the west side of Times Square area, an area known as Hell's Kitchen.
Right.
And tell us a little bit about your life growing up there.
Well, early on, my life was not any different than most people. I grew up in a family, a close-knit family with my dad, my mom, my sister. There was, of course, an extended family, but the neighborhood was obviously under duress. I mean, 42nd Street used to be full of peep shows and karate movies.
Is that what you would have used back there as a kid, that's under duress? What would you use said?
It was chaos. There was chaos out there. Everybody had a game. Everybody had a scheme. So, there was a lot going on the streets.
Now, you sort of slipped into that. What was your game?
Well, I started to dabble early on in my life with marijuana and alcohol. Alcohol in family parties. It was kind of normal to take a swig of a bottle of alcohol or beer or what have you. But
alcohol meaning rum or something?
Beer, wine, vodka, if it was mixed with juice, just parading around the party and just picking up stuff, if you will. But I started dabbling with marijuana. I started cutting school. I started hanging out with the wrong crowd, and before you know it, I was caught up in some trouble.
Did you know they were the wrong crowd at the time?
I was drawn to the crowd because they had the nice clothes, they had the cars, they were a little older than I was, and so I was drawn to the flashing clothes and all of that stuff.
What was the car that had the most prestige then was what?
Well, back then it was like the Lincoln Continental. To be honest with you, the pimps had the best cars.
Yeah, so, because they wanted to show that it's an attraction. So you started growing up into that. Mm-hmm. How was your family reacting to that?
My family, my dad was, him and I had a great relationship early on. He was coach of my baseball team. Somewhere along the line, it was hard. Inflation was driving prices up. There were gas shortages. There wasn't a lot of work. And my dad, even though he was anti-drug, he began to look for a way to support his family. And unfortunately, back then, easy money was found in selling drugs and doing those types of things.
Do you know how he was introduced to that, or he just
saw it? Friends, my uncles were dabbling in using drugs, which he was always against, but it was more from friends on the streets, and that's where he started messing around.
So he talked to one of his friends, and why don't you give me some to deal self? Was he a dealer too?
Yeah, he ended up becoming a dealer, and obviously, again, there were some pressures. I won't justify what he did, but there were some pressures that kind of put you in a tough position. How are you going to feed your family and do the things that you need to do when there's really no work?
Did he enter the drug world before you, or it was sort of parallel paths?
It was kind of parallel in the sense that he began to dabble in selling, I began to dabble in using the marijuana, and then I came to find out that he started using from his own supply, and so now we had 2 people in the house that were both addicted to drugs, and what was once a close relationship, we started to move in opposite directions.
And that eventually engulfed your mom too, right?
Yeah. Later on down the road, my mom ended up dabbling as well with some heroin.
Did y'all end up trying to steal from each other to support your drug
No,
habits?
the only person that stole in the house was me. I was the only one that, obviously my dad had the ability to continue to sell and make money. My mom didn't have any needs in that regard. I stole wherever I could because that was the only way for me to actually support my habit. So that's what I did.
Now, when you were buying the drugs and dealing, were you part of a gang down there, or you was how did you get your space to do the selling?
Yeah, well, it was individual at first, but there was always hanging out with a group of kids that we called ourselves the Midtown Boys, and so we started to get connected with some Colombian dealers and what have you, and we started to transport drugs from within the neighborhood or from Queens back to New York, back to Manhattan.
So the Midtown Boys, how long did that sort of neighborhood group last?
Maybe about, anywhere from like 8 to 10 years, I would say, as we were growing up through our teenage years.
And you were in and out of that group all along?
Yeah, I mean, there were different people in the group, but and different phases and ages, and but it was, it was an interesting time. It was roller skates, it was clubs, it was drugs, it was all of these different things going on at the same time. And
so out of this, what happened to you? Did you move up and start joining Wall Street, or did it go a different direction?
No, it went in a different direction. Obviously, before I knew it, I was an addict. I was in the grips of a drug addiction with crack cocaine, and some other things.
Didn't you know that it would be addictive, or what did you?
Had no clue.
Where did you use your first crack cocaine?
I remember using something they called bazooka, which was like the residue of the cocaine that they cooked, and we would put that in marijuana. And so through that, allowed me to then, when I was hanging out with people, I saw people smoking cocaine in a base pipe, what they used to call free base pipe. And so I obviously was drawn to try it one day. It was in a friend's house, and I tried it, and then that was it. It was like the floodgates were open.
Nobody said, "Oh, don't use this"?
Oh, no, absolutely not. Not with the people I was hanging out with.
No, they say you're missing out.
Absolutely. So there was a little peer pressure, and then of course, there was just also me making decisions that led me down a path. I mean,
I think a lot of people sort of don't know how crack can be so attractive. And when you first used it, what were you feeling?
Well, it made me feel invincible. It made me feel like I didn't have any fear. It made me feel like, obviously I was paranoid as well. And so there was a lot of different things that were going on. But the drug was so powerful that there's a saying, one hit is too many and 1,000 is never enough. And so once you take that first hit, it's like you're always chasing that feeling again.
Now, this led you eventually in and out of jail,
Yep.
a prison, programs that sometimes worked, sometimes didn't. When was the last time you were in Rikers Island?
The last time I was in Rikers Island was in 1995.
What happened?
I was arrested for the last time in my life, and at that point I was a career criminal. Society didn't really have any hope for me. I didn't have any education, and I was sitting on Rikers Island in C95, and I was facing another.
C95 is what? The cell block?
There's a cell block one of the cell blocks in Rikers Island, and I was there facing another drug charge, and my history was all drug cases, and so it was really, I was staring at a lot of time based on my history, and while I was there, I was basically reconsidering everything and just looking back at my life and saying, I'm really in a rut, I'm really in a mess, and I really don't know how to get out of this. I mean, it's a vicious cycle.
You were in your cell by yourself. This is a 5x6, 6x6 cell.
I don't even know the measurements, but it was a cell. I mean, I worked in the mess hall, which is the cafeteria, and so we all had kind of individual cells, and so we were able to kind of have that privacy, if you will. But it's still jail.
Could you tell anybody there about your feelings of being in a rut and your vulnerabilities?
No, not at all. Jail is not conducive for that, right? You don't really have space to really have a real conversation about some of the issues that you're dealing with, and why are you using, and dealing with your shame, your guilt, your fear, dealing with your inability to be vulnerable and transparent and show weakness. Obviously, that's not a place you can show weakness. And so there's a lot of different things there that are challenging about jail.
So you're making this shuffling in your mind.
Mm-hmm.
And what happens?
But this time in Rikers Island was very different, only because a couple of years prior to me landing in jail here for the last time, I had tried drug programs. I had gone to AA. I had gone to NA. I had my wife, who was my girlfriend at the time, tried to get me into neighborhood programs and detox, and I didn't feel like those programs could help me. It always seemed like those programs only gave you an external change, but it was almost like they were targeting behavior, but not the root.
You knew that at the time?
Well, yeah. I mean, I didn't know how to articulate it, but there was something about...
Because you would always go into these programs and say, well, this is it. This is where I make the change. Did you go in with that attitude?
No. Actually, I avoided a lot of those programs because I said, I'll go in there, and before you know it, I'm running the program. I'm going to manipulate. I'm going to make myself appear to be something that I'm not. And so there was something deeper that those programs were not able to give me. And so my wife, back in 1993, suggested that I go to a program in Newark, New Jersey. It was a Christian drug program. And I had never tried a Christian drug program. And I looked at her and I said, who in the world goes to Newark to fix their life? Newark is not a place to go to fix your life. So I went to this dusty old program house in 41 Oriton Avenue in Newark, New Jersey. And it was run by two women who basically ran the program based on Christian principles found in the Word of God. And so that's where I've started to have my encounter with God.
Well, when you got there, you agreed to go.
I did.
Because your girlfriend said, you got to go.
This is your ultimatum.
And so, in fact, she was worried about you.
She was.
But she wanted to keep the relationship.
Well, at that point, I don't know if she wanted to keep the relationship. She was pregnant. She was 19 years old, facing a pregnancy with a boyfriend that was a crackhead, going to a program. So there was a lot of anxiety in her life. But she basically treated me at that point more like a friend, and she loved me as a friend. And she wanted the best for me, so she suggested I go to this place.
So you went.
I did. I acquiesced and went.
From Rikers to there direct? No, this is before Rikers.
This is before Rikers. So I have my encounter with God there. I begin to understand that God has a plan for my life, that I can find purpose, meaning, and my identity. Some of the deeper issues that were actually driving my drug use, right? Because drugs are not really the problem, in my opinion. They're just the vehicle that allows us to really, deal with our issues.
Let me stop you there. That's really interesting. It's partly about identity. After that point, what did you think your identity was?
I didn't have an identity because I thought I wanted to be a baseball player. I squandered that opportunity in 1986.
Now, don't tell me you're a Yankee fan.
Oh, Lord help me. Of course I am. Who's not a Yankee fan?
Well, I used to live down the street from the stadium. So for you Mets fans, we hope next year will be better.
Maybe next year.
But so you weren't able to accomplish these dreams.
Right. I dropped out of school. I lost an opportunity to play baseball. I didn't really have an identity. I didn't know who I was. I didn't know how to express what I was feeling. I had issues with my dad because obviously we were going in opposite directions, but I really didn't know how to connect with my dad. I really didn't have a model of what I needed to do at that point.
Did he know how to connect to you?
Well, he did in his own way. He tried, and my dad was really valiant in trying, but it just his motto was, I'd rather have you with me than have you on the streets. And my thing was I was dealing with shame and guilt. I didn't want to be around my dad when I was doing wrong things that were just not right. And so there was a lot of issues there. And I ended up, and so he also threw me out of the house a few times because I was stealing. So there was that tension as well of, you rejected me when I was at my worst. And so there was a lot of different things. But anyway, I didn't really have an identity. I didn't really have a purpose or a meaning. What I thought I was interested in was gone. And so here I come to this drug program, and I begin to understand that there is a God who created me with a plan and a purpose.
Did you believe in God before?
I did not. My family never grew up around.
I mean, when they saw God, what did you think?
I didn't know what to think. I didn't know what to think. But I went to this program. I started to see that there was something to this program. It was, the way the women were sharing and expressing love and our acceptance that is found in Christ and all of that stuff. So I began to understand that God had a plan for my life. I surrender my life. I come to a place where I say, God, I don't really understand everything, but if you are real, I need you to come in and fix my life.
So you start there, you sort of improved and slide and then end up back in Rikers.
I improved, but then somewhere along the line, I buy into the concept that I have to go back into the community to test this God thing out. And I go back to the neighborhood with a challenge. I sent out a challenge to God. I said, if you are really real and really doing something in my life, I'm going back to Hell's Kitchen tonight to get me a bag of heroin, to get high. And if you're real, you could stop me.
Oh, that's a pretty big, audacious claim.
So I went back and I went to the neighborhood drug dealers that I knew very well. And one by one, they began to send me away with a different excuse as to why they couldn't give me a bag of heroin. And, different reasons. Cops are around the corner.
Maybe they
come back later.
You might not pay for it.
Yeah, you might not give me money back, whatever. But I ended up getting a bag of heroin from my mother's house, which belonged to my dad. And I went into the hallway at 50th Street, 442 West 50th Street, New York City. And I sniffed that bag of heroin. And for the first time in my life, it had no effect on me. I thought my dad's heroin is not really that good, and I didn't know what happened. At no point did I acknowledge perhaps maybe God is stepping in here and doing something sovereignly, but I stayed on the streets, got worse than ever, and led me back to Rikers Island, which is where I'm at in C95, right? And so I'm back at C95. I'm now dealing with why I'm here. I'm dealing with remorse. I'm dealing with, I can't go back to God because I already turned my back on God. So why would he want me?
Yeah.
And so here I am, really no hope, no real solution to this problem. I don't see a way out. And I have a dream that changes everything. Basically, it's a dream that is explained in my book called Arrested by Grace. But God intervenes and sends me a dream that actually speaks into my situation.
What's the dream like?
In this dream, I was standing on a piece of a fence, and it was floating in the air. And there were people walking underneath the fence, just going about normal life. And there were 3 men that had wolves on leashes like dogs. And the wolves had sheep clothing and, the woolly thing. And they were running up the fence trying to get me. And, I woke up terrified, thought it was a nightmare, and went to eat breakfast in the morning at the jail at cell block, and came back, went back to sleep, and I went back to the dream. I was back on the fence.
So it continued?
Continued.
Did the wolves get you?
The wolves were trying to get me, but no, I began to remember in my dream that, there was a verse in the Bible that says, whoever calls upon the name of the Lord shall be saved. And I began to cry out to Jesus to save me so that I didn't get caught up by these wolves. And so my dream changes. I'm now in my mother's house.
Just
in
like
my room.
That, the dream starts to fade into another scene.
It goes into another scene. I'm in my mother's house. There's a pulpit, a wooden pulpit, in my bedroom with a Bible open, and there are people sitting in the floor and on my bed waiting for me to speak from the Bible. So I wake up. I instinctively know something is different about this. And it
was still dark in the cell, though.
Of course, it was morning time at that point. It was about 7 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah.
Breakfast is usually around 4 or 5 in the morning. And I just got on my knees and began to repent, if you will, and say, God, I'm sorry for what I did. I'm sorry for causing pain. I don't want to be the same person anymore. And if you will have me, if you can just change my life, I will give you total control.
And then you went to breakfast?
I had gone to breakfast earlier.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, but no, after that I called my wife and told her about the dream, and she really didn't want to hear much about it. She was angry with me.
She's afraid she had heard this type of thing.
She had heard it before, and but in a couple weeks later, she got some money to bail me out, and I came out for a couple months, but then went back to jail because I got sentenced for the case.
Now you're on a different path,
Mm-hmm.
and eventually you become a pastor, and you come here to East Harlem.
That's right.
We're in East Harlem.
Well, the church is located, the main services is located on 280 Pleasant Avenue inside the high school, Manhattan Science Center for Math and Science, and we hold services there on Sundays at 10 a.m. and the second service at 12. Our midweek service is here on 102nd and Lexington, which is on 1620 Lexington Avenue.
Which is not far away from here.
No, a couple of blocks away, and we're there on Wednesdays at 7:30 to 8:30.
Now, what's the name of the church?
East Harlem Fellowship.
Now, this church was around before you got here, but when did you start as pastoring at East Harlem?
I started pastoring in 2009, but the church has been in the community since 1998. The church started as a coffee shop ministry, if you will, and it grew into English as a second language classes, after-school programs, and Sunday services. And it's been in the community since '98. Our church is very diverse, culturally, different nationalities, different walks of life. I mean, we have women from domestic violence shelters, we have ex-offenders, we have lawyers and nurses. All walks of life, all age groups. And
how do you keep all those different types of people together?
Oh, that's a good question. But, I think God has a lot to do with how he keeps it together for me.
Okay. I know that one thing you have on your heart is about reaching out to people that are in the jails where you were at.
Mm-hmm.
Can you tell us a little bit about what your plans are and what you're going to do?
Yeah, that's a great question, and thank you for asking. There's a lot of conversation right now about criminal justice reform. There's a lot of emphasis on the amount of people that are in jail, waiting trial, and all of these different things. And so this is something that's near and dear to my heart, because I know my experience as I went into the prison system and as I came out. And there are a lot of programs out there that are helping with reentry and all of these things. But, one thing that I believe is missing is the transformation of the inmate's heart, person that's on the inside. You can come out and try to change external behavior, but I believe that change has to come from the inside out if it's going to be lasting change. And so my book is, we're right now doing a prison project where we're going to send the book into all of the prisons in the U.S. It's about 6,125 prisons all over the United States, facilities, jails, what have you. So we're working on a campaign to send that book into the prison so that it could be a source of inspiration and hope.
If people want to find out more about this campaign, they can go to your website?
They can go to East Harlem Fellowship website, and they'll look for Arrested by Grace Prison Project, and that information will be there.
Let me ask you this about your church. I want to try to get a picture of your church. What's unique about your church? You'd say, "Oh, Tony, you should come to my church because." What would you say?
Oh boy, what's unique about our church? The different nationalities that are walking together in unity.
What nations do you have there?
We got people from Africa. We got people from, Ireland. We got people from the Philippines. We got people from Puerto Rico, Santo Domingo. We have people that come from Brooklyn, Newark, New Jersey, the Bronx, Queens.
really?
They
Far
they
territories.
right. So there must be something good if they're coming that
Yeah.
distance, right?
How
And
many
so,
come? How many on a typical
About
Sunday?
100, about 100. But there are other things that are unique about our church. We're very missional in the sense that we're a church without walls. We believe that our job is to represent God in the community, and we need to be actively involved in the community and making a difference. And so we feel a unique call to the next generation of kids, so we do some academic enrichment and all those things.
That brings up a question in the neighborhood is, we've had this opioid epidemic hit. Here and there are hot pockets all through New York City. Is there evidence of that opioid epidemic here in East Harlem?
There is. I mean, there are still people using drugs, and opioid crisis is here as well. It's a little bit more hidden than it used to be. It's kind of contained into specific either project tenements or certain alleys and corners, if you will. Back in the 80s, it was a lot more out in the open.
Right.
Now it's a little bit hidden, but it's still a problem here.
Does that mean that if it's hidden more, does that mean people sort of hide it better from their friends and relatives, or do you find out right away?
I think it's a little bit of both. But one thing about East Harlem, we're very rich in social services, meaning there's a lot of different programs here. If you go to 124th Street and Lexington Avenue, for instance, there's a lot of people there that you can see the effects of the crisis, right? And so I don't think our city knows what to do with them.
So what in your value added is the heart value, is that it?
Well, not just the heart value. I believe there needs to be mentors along the way. I believe there needs to be some real conversations about how we bring people, how we rebuild people. We got to rescue them, right? There's a rescue effort, there's a rebuilding effort, and then there's a reentry effort that I believe needs to be supported along the way. And I think some of our programs still have gaps in that holistic approach, if you will. So I think spirituality plays a significant point in all of this.
Can you give me an example real quickly, of how your church has impacted somebody's life in the last couple of weeks?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, we have a young lady who is here from Africa. She's in a wheelchair. She has been with our congregation for some time.
Okay, I want to hear more about this, but it's going to have to be next time.
Okay.
Because you're talking about somebody's life, and I want to give enough, but we really thank you for being here today.
Wonderful.
Thank you for joining us at a journey through NYC religion. See you next time.